Lauren Miller was minutes away from stepping into the biggest night of her career when her 14-year-old daughter whispered something that would shatter the ground beneath her feet. "Mom, it's a trap. They set you up." She said it like she was confessing a sin, eyes wide, fingers trembling against the seatbelt. Outside, Denver's winter streets blurred into streaks of gold under the hotel lights, but all I could hear was my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. This was the moment when a celebration could turn into my public execution. But here's the thing, sometimes the people you trust most sharpen the knives behind your back, and sometimes the smallest voice in the room becomes your only shield. What would you do if you found out the person you built your life with was about to ruin you in front of the world? Stick around, because you'll want to hear how one teenage girl changed the ending of a story everyone thought was already written. And if you've ever believed in second chances, hit that like, share this with someone who needs it, and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. The night had begun like any other winter evening in the city, street lamps glowing, the hum of traffic muffled by fresh snow. Sophie sat beside me, staring out at the frost-rimmed windows, unusually quiet for someone who loved to chatter about everything. I thought she was just nervous about speaking at the event. She'd rehearsed her little introduction for weeks. My hands gripped the wheel a little tighter as the hotel's grand facade came into view, its arched windows spilling warm light into the cold air. Then she turned toward me, her voice trembling, and the words spilled out, about overhearing hushed phone calls, about seeing Ethan in the study with a woman she didn't recognize, about a file swapped on the laptop that was supposed to hold my presentation. Each syllable landed like a stone in my chest. I eased the SUV to a stop, the tires crunching against packed snow, and for a moment we just sat there, two breaths hanging in the air, both knowing nothing would be the same after tonight. I still remember the first winter Ethan and I spent in Denver, back when the city felt like a blank canvas, and we were convinced we could paint something extraordinary together. We rented a little brick townhouse on the edge of Capitol Hill, its windows drafty, its pipes clanging in the middle of the night. But we didn't care. We had each other, and the kind of ambition that made every cup of instant coffee taste like champagne. He would come home from his construction job with his hands still rough from the cold, and I'd be at the kitchen table, surrounded by invoices and design sketches for what would become my first boutique architecture firm. We talked about everything, where we'd travel, the house we'd build, the family we'd raise. Sophie came into our lives on a rainy spring afternoon, wearing a yellow raincoat 2 sizes too big, her hair in tangled braids. She was 5. Quiet at first, the kind of quiet that makes you wonder what the world has already taken from a child. I knelt down, looked into those dark brown eyes, and something in me knew she was meant to be mine. The adoption papers were just ink, the bond was instant. Ethan carried her suitcase upstairs, pretending to groan at how heavy it was. And Sophie laughed, really laughed, for the first time that day. That sound still echoes in me. Life wasn't perfect, but it was ours. I worked long hours, chasing clients, sketching late into the night under the soft hum of the desk lamp. Ethan said he admired my drive, told me I was building something that would put us all on the map. On weekends, he grilled steaks in the backyard while Sophie and I planted tulips along the fence. We celebrated every small win, a new contract, Sophie's first piano recital, the day we finally paid off the second-hand SUV. The three of us would pile onto the couch, Sophie wedged between us with a bowl of popcorn, and we'd watch old movies until she fell asleep with her head on my shoulder. I made sacrifices without thinking twice. I skipped vacations, turned down a dream job in Chicago so Sophie wouldn't have to change schools. When Ethan's younger brother got laid off, we covered his rent for 6 months. I told myself this was what family did for each other. There was a sweetness in those early years, a rhythm we found without even trying. Some nights, after Sophie had gone to bed, Ethan would pour us both a glass of wine, and we'd sit on the porch, wrapped in blankets, talking about how lucky we were. I believed him. I believed in us. Ethan began taking more late meetings, coming home smelling faintly of cologne I didn't recognize. He said the firm he was consulting for liked to talk business over bourbon, and I wanted to believe him. But then there were the texts, Flashes of light in the dark bedroom, his hand sliding the phone under the pillow when I stirred. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was tired from work, that he'd always been a little private. One night, I came home early from a client dinner. The house was dark except for the warm glow spilling out from his study. Jazz, low, slow, unfamiliar, slipped under the door. I pushed it open just enough to see him at his desk, leaning back in his chair, grinning at someone on a video call. A woman's voice, soft but playful, floated out before he noticed me and slammed his laptop shut. "Just business," he said, standing too quickly, like he could block my view of the screen. Sophie noticed things too. She'd ask, "Why isn't Dad at dinner?" Or, "Who's that lady with the red hair?" after catching a glimpse of someone leaving the house when I wasn't home. I tried to laugh it off, tell her it must have been a neighbor or a delivery driver. But there was a look in her eyes, too sharp, too knowing for a 14-year-old, that made my stomach twist. The distance between us grew without either of us admitting it. Our porch talks turned into silent evenings in separate rooms. He stopped asking about my projects. I stopped telling him when I landed a new client. The warmth we'd wrapped ourselves in for years was thinning, letting in drafts I couldn't quite shut out. And yet, I clung to the picture we'd painted together, the family we'd built, the vows we'd made in that little church outside Boulder. Because if I let myself see the truth too soon, I knew everything we had would start to unravel. What I didn't know then was just how quickly those threads were already being pulled. The first time I met Vanessa was at a backyard barbecue Ethan insisted we host. He said it was for networking, that inviting a few potential partners could help my firm land bigger contracts. Laughter bubbling from the patio. Sophie was setting out paper plates when a sleek black car pulled up. Out stepped a woman I'd never seen before, tall, with a cascade of auburn hair that caught the sunlight like flame. She wore a fitted cream dress, heels far too delicate for our patchy backyard grass. Ethan was at her side before I could blink, his hand resting a moment too long on her back as he guided her toward me. "This is Vanessa," he said, grinning in a way I hadn't seen in years. "She's going to help us with marketing for the new expansion." Vanessa's smile was warm, but there was a weight behind her eyes, like she already knew more about my life than I'd told her. Throughout the afternoon, I caught them standing too close by the grill, their heads tilted together over some private joke. She touched his arm when she laughed. He leaned in when she spoke. I kept moving, refilling drinks, clearing plates, but I felt Sophie's gaze following the same trail mine did. At one point, she came to stand beside me, whispering just loud enough, "Is she going to work for you, or for Dad?" Her tone was light, but her fingers curled tight around the edge of the table. I told myself it was nothing. Told myself Ethan wouldn't disrespect me like that, not in our own home, not in front of our daughter. But every time I looked at him, I saw a man lit from the inside by something I couldn't name. The morning of the launch began like any other big day in my life. Too early, too much coffee, and a knot in my stomach I tried to pass off as excitement. The sky over Denver was still dark when I slipped into my black dress, the one I'd bought months ago for this exact moment. Today was supposed to be the unveiling of my firm's most ambitious project yet, the kind of work that would put us on the national map. Ethan was already in the kitchen, suit jacket slung over a chair, phone pressed to his ear. He didn't even look up when I walked in. "I've got to pick up a VIP, he said as soon as he hung up. "You and Sophie should just meet me there." His tone was brisk, efficient, like we were discussing logistics for a delivery, not the culmination of years of my work. "I thought we'd ride together," I said, keeping my voice even. "Not today," he replied, eyes darting toward the counter where his briefcase sat half open. "Traffic's going to be a nightmare." Sophie wandered in, still in her robe, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "I can go with Dad," she offered, but Ethan shook his head quickly. "No, you ride with your mom. I'll see you both there." It should have been nothing, just a change in plans. But there was something in the way he avoided my eyes, the way his hand lingered over the clasp of his briefcase before snapping it shut, that made my pulse skip. I poured coffee, trying to focus on my checklist, But I caught Sophie watching him too, her brow furrowed like she was solving a math problem in her head. When he finally left, the house felt strangely hollow. I went upstairs to grab my presentation notes, and that's when Sophie's voice drifted from the study. "Mom," she was standing in front of Ethan's laptop, the screen still glowing. "I think you need to see this." On the display was an email thread, his name, Vanessa's name, and a subject line that made my stomach turn. Presentation file replaced, ready to destroy her. My first instinct was denial. Maybe it was a draft, a joke, something taken out of context. But the attachments were there, labeled identically to my work files. Sophie's eyes were wide, her voice barely above a whisper. The street outside was still glazed with frost when we stepped out, but the chill that ran through me had nothing to do with the cold. Whatever was waiting for us at that hotel. I hadn't said much since we left. Part of me was still hoping I'd wake up from this, but the silence between us felt like it was pressing down on my chest. Halfway to the hotel, she spoke. Her voice was small, but it cut through the hum of the engine. "Mom, there's more." I glanced at her, my grip tightening on the wheel. "Tell me." She swallowed hard. "Last night, I went downstairs for water. I heard Dad on the phone with Vanessa. They were laughing, and then he said, 'She won't see it coming. Once the file plays, it's over.'" Sophie's eyes darted toward me, searching for my reaction. "He said they'd tell the investors you were stealing money, that the numbers wouldn't add up." The knot in my stomach twisted tighter. "And you're sure that's what you heard?" She nodded quickly. "They mentioned the projector. He told her not to mess it up this time." I took a deep breath, forcing my mind to focus. My career, my name, everything I had built, it was all balanced on a knife's edge, and Ethan was about to push. But he wasn't counting on Sophie. He wasn't counting on me being ready. I hit the call button on my steering wheel and dialed Marcus, my head of tech for the event. He answered on the second ring, cheerful and unaware. "Marcus, listen carefully," I said, my voice low but sharp. "When you get to the hotel, check every device connected to the projector, laptops, tablets, anything. Make sure nothing's been swapped. And record everything. I don't care how. Just do it." There was a pause. "Is something wrong?" "Just trust me," I said, and hung up before he could press further. Sophie was watching me, her hands knotted in her lap. "What if we're too late?" I glanced at her, trying to soften my voice. "We won't be." But inside, I knew we were already racing the clock. The hotel's glass facade appeared ahead, gleaming in the winter sun. From the outside, it looked like the place where dreams were celebrated. From where I sat, it looked like an execution chamber. As I turned into the parking lot, the lobby doors swung open, flooding us with the hum of voices and the faint clink of champagne glasses. Warm air rushed over my skin, but it didn't melt the ice in my veins. Every step toward the ballroom felt heavier, like the carpet itself was trying to pull me down. Sophie stayed close, her hand brushing mine as if to remind me she was still there. Marcus was already inside, fiddling with the soundboard at the back of the room. When he saw me, his easy grin faded. He tilted his head toward the stage, where Ethan stood in a tight circle with Vanessa and two men I recognized from the investor list. They were laughing. Ethan had that polished charm turned all the way up, the same smile he'd worn the first time he convinced me to take a risk on him. I walked straight to Marcus, keeping my head high. "Well?" I asked under my breath. They swapped the primary laptop, the low murmur of conversation filling the air. Waiters glided between tables with trays of champagne. My name was printed on the event program in elegant gold script, a detail that suddenly felt like a lie waiting to be told. When the lights dimmed, Ethan made his way to the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice rich and confident. "Thank you for joining us on this remarkable day." I caught Marcus's eye across the room. He gave the faintest nod. Everything was in place. My pulse pounded in my ears, but my hands were steady. Whatever happened next, I was ready for it, and so was Sophie. Ethan had written his ending for me, but he was about to find out I had brought my own pen. Ethan's voice rolled smoothly over the crowd. Each word polished, rehearsed, dripping with the confidence of a man certain he's already won. Vanessa sat near the front, one leg crossed over the other, her red hair catching the glow of the stage lights. She was smiling, not at the speech, but at me, as if she could already taste my ruin. I sat still, my back straight, my eyes fixed on Ethan. He talked about vision, about integrity, about the dedicated team that made this project possible. Every phrase was a carefully placed brick, building up to the moment they thought would shatter me. This was it, the moment they had rigged. But instead of their doctored slides, the screen flickered to life with grainy security footage. Gasps rippled through the room as the image sharpened. Ethan and Vanessa in his study, leaning close over my laptop. Their voices played through the speakers, clear enough for every person in the ballroom to hear. "She'll never see it coming," Ethan's voice said, smug and certain. Vanessa laughed. "The numbers will make her look like a thief. They'll drop her in a heartbeat." A murmur swelled among the guests. Chairs shifted. Somewhere near the back, a man cursed under his breath. Ethan froze, the smile sliding from his face. That's not the right file," he stammered, glancing toward the tech booth. But Marcus stood there, arms folded, the picture of innocence. The footage rolled on, emails on the screen, Vanessa's hand dragging a folder into my presentation. Ethan's instructions to make sure it was ready for the big reveal. Every second stripped another layer of his control. And then the sound of footsteps cut through the whispers. But the authority in his voice carried to every corner of the room. "Ethan Miller, Vanessa Price, you're under arrest." Vanessa's face drained of color. "This is a mistake," she blurted. But the officers were already taking her by the arm. Ethan's gaze locked on me as they cuffed him. Anger, disbelief, and something else. Fear. I didn't move. Didn't smile. I simply met his stare and let the silence between us say what I didn't need to. "You underestimated me." The officers led them out, the door closing behind them with a heavy thud. For a moment, the ballroom was utterly still. Then the whispers started again, but now they weren't about my downfall. They were about how I'd just taken the stage without even standing up. The weeks after the arrest felt like I was living in someone else's story. Reporters camped outside my office. Headlines splashed my name alongside Ethan's. But for once, I wasn't the one being dragged through the mud. The footage from that night had gone everywhere. Clients called to say they stood by me, and investors who had been hesitant before were suddenly eager to sign. The police came by my office more than once, asking for statements, collecting evidence. I learned things I wish I could forget. Ethan and Vanessa hadn't just targeted me. They'd done it before, to other partners, other companies. It was a pattern: build trust, then gut the person from the inside. But there was one detail I never saw coming. Detective Harris came to see me on a rainy Tuesday, his coat dripping on the edge of my rug. He sat across from me, his voice steady, but his eyes holding something careful. "Lauren, in the course of this investigation, we uncovered records from a closed adoption agency in Fort Collins. I think you'll want to hear this." He slid a manila folder across the desk. Inside were scanned documents, Sophie's adoption file, the original birth certificate, and a name I didn't recognize. Michael Carter. Father. I stared at it for a long moment, the hum of the rain outside filling the silence. "Her father?" I finally asked. Harris nodded. "He's been looking for her for years. Never knew she was placed in the system. Ethan withheld that information. We believe Vanessa helped cover it up." That night, I sat Sophie down in the kitchen. The rain had stopped, leaving the world outside quiet and still. "There's something I need to tell you," I began, my voice softer than I felt. She listened without interrupting, her fingers curled around her mug of cocoa. When I finished, she looked at me with those same deep brown eyes I'd first seen under a too-big yellow raincoat. "Do you think I could meet him?" she asked. A week later, we did. Michael walked into the small cafe in Boulder, looking like a man holding his breath. He froze when he saw her, then smiled in a way that broke something open inside me. Sophie stood, and he wrapped her in a hug that seemed to erase the years between them. I sat there, watching, my hands wrapped around my coffee to keep them from shaking. This was her moment, And maybe, in a strange way, it was mine too. A reminder that even after the worst betrayals, life has a way of handing you something worth holding on to. 1 year can feel like a lifetime when everything changes. By the following winter, the pieces of my life looked nothing like the ones Ethan had tried to break. Michael and I had married quietly in the backyard of our new home in Golden, Colorado. Just family, close friends, and the mountains standing witness. Sophie stood beside me in a pale blue dress, her smile wide and sure, holding the bouquet she insisted on making herself. Our house was loud now, filled with the chaos of a blended family. Michael's 2 boys raced through the halls. Sophie in the middle of the pack, her laughter carrying from room to room. Some nights, when the fire was low and everyone had gone to bed, I'd sit on the couch and let the sound of this new life sink in. It was messy, unpredictable, and more beautiful than anything I'd imagined. The firm was thriving. The evidence left little room for anything else. I never went to see them, never answered the letters Ethan sent. Forgiveness is a personal thing, and I wasn't ready to hand mine over. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I had let go of the weight. That was enough. One evening, as the sun slipped behind the Rockies, painting the sky in streaks of orange and violet, I looked around at the faces lit by string lights and realized this was it. Not the perfect picture I once thought I needed, but the real thing. When it came time for a toast, I raised my glass and let my eyes find Sophie's. Protect your dreams. Protect your heart. And never ignore the voice of someone who loves you enough to tell you the truth. My voice caught, but I didn't hide it. If you believe in second chances, share them. Because you never know whose life might be saved by it. She grinned, and the whole yard lifted their glasses. In that moment, I knew we weren't just surviving. We were living fully, fiercely, and together. And if this story touched you, if it made you think about who you trust, who you protect, and what second chances can mean, don't keep it to yourself. Hit the like button, share it with someone who might need a reminder to listen to the voices that truly care, and subscribe so you're here for the next story that might just change the way you see your own life.